Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered and contribute to the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke from Seattle, Washington.
And I gather things have cooled down slightly in Seattle there, Zach. A little bit more comfortable than last time we spoke.
It is so amazing. It's so wonderful. It's overcast and 61 degrees. So what is that? 47 degrees cooler than it was a week ago, Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah.
Well, that's that climate severity and changes that we're seeing is definitely relevant to today's topic. One of the things that just straight off the bat that our guest talks about was his experience with Indigenous communities and things appearing that they didn't have names for because they'd never seen them in that environment before. Different insects, different birds, and things like that. Which and this is a while ago, I think, that he had those experiences. So he is very attuned to the realities of changes taking place in the climate, and I would expect that a lot of the west coast of America is equally attuned after your experiences last week.
We are attuned to that. I think a lot of us are attuned to the quality of our buildings too.
Yeah, true, because so much of your buildings don't have any way to cool down, right? Yeah, right. If we don't have a passive house and we don't have a heat pump or air conditioning, we can be pretty uncomfortable. Our house has a basement, so we're in good shape. But my colleague at the accelerator, Sydney Gladu, who also lives in Seattle, is in an apartment, and it was reaching 107 inside, she said. Wow. And
so
there's just nothing to do about it.
The entire time outside in the shade, but it was brutal out there. So yeah.
All right. Well, we should get on to it because it's a cracker interview this week. But before we do that, we've got some people to thank for helping us bring you the Passive House podcast.
We sure do. So everything we do at the Accelerator, including the podcast, comes thanks to support from our sponsors. So I want to give a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxtingwe Architects, Mitsubishi Electric Trane HVAC US, Partel, Glavel, Minotaur All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, RDH Building Science, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsor is SIGA, and our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority. So thanks to our sponsors.
Awesome. Who is Chris Ballard, Zach?
Chris Ballard is the relatively new CEO. He joined, a couple of years ago, of Passive House Canada. And he is a pretty amazing person. He's got a long history of supporting environmental and land use causes, most recently as Ontario's Minister of Environment and Climate Change. And he was implementing the government's plan there for a clean environment and sustainable economy. He's also served as the Minister of Housing and the minister responsible for Ontario's poverty reduction strategy. And he was a member of the Treasury Board there. He was the past executive director of the 60,000 member Consumers Association of Canada, and a founding board member of the Consumers Council of Canada. He served as a leader in journalism and communications and public affairs. So he brings a unique and formidable set of skills to the leadership of a really important passive house institution in North America. And I think that there, as you'll hear in the interview, there are some really important ways that is crucial given where Passive House Canada is in its evolution and given where Canada is in its progress on Passive House and buildings. So really great interview. Hope everyone enjoys it. On computer. All right.
That's good. Great. Okay.
All right, let's get going. So welcome, Chris Ballard, CEO of Passive House Canada, to the Passive House podcast. It's so great to have you here.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for the work that you folks do in promoting Passive House, not only in North America, but around the world. Good job.
Oh, well, that's a very high compliment coming from you, Chris, and from Passive House Canada, who's become an exemplar of accelerating Passive House and implementation of Passive House and market transformation around Passive House. So we have so much to talk about, and
it's all about.
Yeah, so excited. So you've had a storied political career with lots of sustainability work. I mean, you most recently as Ontario's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, is that right?
That's right.
And then you also served as the Minister of Housing and the Minister responsible for Ontario's poverty reduction strategy. You were a member of the Treasury Board. So can you share a little bit about this journey and what brought you to Passive House and Passive House Canada?
Well, I guess if you have to go back a few years. I spent a lot of time in communications and public affairs, working with clients, First Nation clients in Canada's far north, in Yukon, Northwest Territories, 25, 30 years ago, and saw early on what at the time down here we were calling global warming. But in the far north, folks were seeing the impact of this so-called global warming all around them. They were seeing new species showing up. They were seeing ice formations melting back into the ground. They were seeing polar bears showing up in places they'd never been seen before. And I was listening and learning about global warming when I was back in Ontario. And we put two and two together and really began to understand that long ago that global warming, or the climate change, climate crisis, it's a real thing. Mm-hmm. It's been happening in Canada for decades now, and it's accelerating. In the far north, the effect of melting permafrost is profound and will only get worse. So it really drove home to me that Canada's north was that canary in the mine. You know, right. It was signaling that climate change is a real thing. It's happening in Canada's north. It will be happening. And of course, all around the world. So I became very interested in what the causes were, what some of the solutions were, etc. And you fast forward to that, and I became a municipal town councillor and in a small community, and my focus was always on the environment and on climate change mitigation. And that's how I gained a name for myself in that area. And when I was elected to the Ontario legislature as a member of provincial parliament, I was tasked with looking at affordable housing affordability, all under the purview of climate change, culminating with being named Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and having some interesting times there, I'll tell you. When I was the minister, I was responsible for Ontario's climate change action plan, which was a very ambitious plan that my predecessor had started and I continued on. We were focusing on cap and trade, which was a system whereby we basically polluters paid, and the funds that came from that process went towards GHG emission reductions. We raised about, by the time I left, about $2.2 billion, all of which was dedicated for improving transit in Ontario, improving our buildings in Ontario, and really making a dent in the GHG emissions that Ontario puts out. I mean, Ontario is probably about half of Canada's population. It's a good portion of its GDP, and I think we're second in GHG emissions. So we really had to do something. And one of the things that just, sorry if I'm making the story too long.
No,
one
not
of the
at all.
initiatives, one of the initiatives we launched using the cap and trade funds was a program called Green On. And it was targeting building owners. The initial outlay was $300 million we put into that fund. And it helped building owners, homeowners to put better insulation, better windows, better doors, those sorts of very fundamental things in use to make their homes more comfortable. And that really was an early introduction for me to the potency of making buildings better, and really an understanding of the effect that buildings have in Canada in terms of their GHG emissions. I know, Toronto, about 53% of its GHG emissions are through buildings, and the Atmospheric Fund is now saying that's as high as 60%.
Oh, wow.
Vancouver's about 52%. And so when you start hearing these statistics and I turned to the experts and said, you mean by improving the windows and doors and insulation in a house or a building, we can reduce that significantly? And they said, yes, Minister. So from that point forward, I was all in. So it made a lot of sense when Passive House Canada approached me to take on the role of CEO. And I was really humbled because it's quite an organization, and it had great roots, great Canadian roots that I always like to talk about as well. My focus has been to build Passive House in central Canada, in Ontario, Quebec, to grow us in eastern Canada, and to really nurture the good things we've got going in BC, quite frankly, which is our ancestral home, we'll say, to Passive House here in Canada. And although we have a number of employees now in Ontario, BC will remain our headquarters because that's where our roots are, and that's where the majority of our staff are. So we're excited to be there. So that's my job has been to grow the numbers, get more members, bring municipalities on board, bring provincial governments on board, work with federal government departments, use my own connections and my channels to get to the government decision makers, to educate them about Passive House and the potential that it presents for climate change impact, to work with municipalities, to help them with policy, and to nudge provinces in the right direction. So we've got a number of balls in the air. But it's all tied back to my early days of wandering around Gwich'in territory and Satu districts of northern Canada, and having elders talk to me about wasps. They did not have a name for a wasp, but what are wasps doing in Inuvik? They've never been there before, but the winters are now warm enough that they can overwinter. What are these birds with red chests doing on my front lawn? Down south, we call them robins. Those kinds of things. And in some parts of the Northwest Territories, thunderstorms in places that have never had a record of thunderstorms, scaring the living heck out of all of us because they were so big. A real living example of climate change that I saw just as a non-scientist 30 years ago. That really drove home to me the fact that something big was about to happen down south. And it's happening. It's happening right now, all around us. And Passive House can play a big role in both mitigating climate change and helping us adapt. We're past the tipping point. We can't stop climate change. It's here. It's going to be getting worse. So we need really good quality buildings. We can't quibble anymore.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm tired of the quibbling about and I'm tired of the pushback from some in the industry who want to put off change. And they can afford to do that. Most of them are wealthy folks who can put off changing their business practices. But the rest of us can't. Our kids can't. Our grandkids can't.
Yeah. Here. I'd love to hear an update on Passive House Canada's policy progress and current priorities. Before we do that, I'd love to first kind of lay a foundation a little bit in terms of what you see as the theory of change for Passive House Canada right now. Like, what are the 2 or 3 main things that you want to change or influence to help Passive House take the next step change in Canada? I mean, and I'll step back and just say that from viewing what's going on in Canada from south of the border, we see you as a major step ahead of the rest of us down here. So it's inspiring, and it's also really interesting to see how this is playing out, and kind of we can hopefully be in a similar place in a few years. Anyway, I'd love to hear your insights around this. What are the key things that you wanted to move now? Yeah.
I mean, the first thing I'll say is it's very kind of you to say that that's I love to hear that that's the view of folks in the U.S. And
it absolutely is.
Yeah. I mean, because we all know that when you're up to your neck in the swamp, fighting alligators, you don't necessarily see yourselves as making a great deal of progress. But when we talk to our colleagues around the world with other Passive House organizations, I think Canada, the Canadian organization, Canadian Passive House practitioners, can be quite proud of how far they've pushed things. We always look at how much more we need to do, right? We never always look at how far we've come. So it's really nice. It's really nice to hear that. So thank you. There's 3. In terms of a theory of change or what our strategic objectives are, there's really 3 pillars of what we're attempting to do at Passive House Canada. We're obviously, first and foremost, an advocacy organization. We're advocating for the Passive House building standard, and that's obviously key to what we do. But we're trying to advance, good quality buildings, zero emission buildings in 3 areas. One is continuing to educate the building industry. Passive House Canada, I believe, is now the second largest educator of Passive House practitioners. I think second only to China. Wow. We had over 2,000 people we last year come through our courses. And it's really important, while everyone is pouring money into lobbyists and they're lobbying federal government and provincial government. And, we're really busy trying to build the grassroots support. So architects, engineers, general contractors, tradespeople, we're really busy getting to them and training them in Passive House principles, because they're the ones who are influencing the marketplace in many, many ways, right? Many times a client will come to an architect, they want to do something different, and it's the architect, it's the engineer who says, have you considered Passive House? And so getting really ingrained within the building industry is critical to our success. And I give real credit to the folks at Passive House Canada for developing a line of education. We spend a considerable amount of our budget on building new courses, revitalizing courses, training our instructors, and I think it's shown. We have for our designer consultant program, by the way, I think the stats came out about 96% graduation or exam passing rate.
Nice.
And that has impressed the Passive House Institute, who often wonder how we're doing it. You know, this small little country of Canada spread over such a vast area, and you're cranking these people through, and 96% of them are passing. And I think it's similar with our trades program as well. The number of tradespeople who take the PHI exam, we have a similar success rate with passing. But you know, it's one of the three legs of this, the stool of success, is that providing education, and it's a form of advocacy. And the founders of Passive House Canada understood that we weren't going to be successful ultimately unless we got the building industry trained up. And I like to talk about the numbers, but we've barely scraped the barrel, quite frankly. You know, we barely started. There are tens of thousands of more people we need to reach. But it's really exciting to see the snowball is really gathering momentum, and we're doing more and more each month. So education, that's key to our advocacy. The second thing that I really kicked off coming to Passive House Canada, we now have a director of government and stakeholder relations, Anna Milner. We brought Anna on board to really coordinate and push forward the Passive House building standard with 3, some places 4 levels of government. It's an awful lot of education, but we're making great progress there, working with the federal government, legislators, their agencies and departments. We're working with provincial governments and municipal governments and regional governments in some cases to educate them about Passive House, and to tie. Many municipalities in Canada have declared a climate emergency, and so we're very good at tying the Passive House standard to helping them meet their goals that they declared through their climate change emergency. And I think that's makes us a bit different, is that we're not browbeating, we're not waggling the finger. We're helping municipalities and governments at all levels reach the goals that they set. So the federal government set net zero by 2050. It's recently upped its targets, short-term targets. We're there to help. We can bring policy to the table. We can bring technical expertise to the table. We can help them make their buildings better, and we can help them as they try and sort out a route through all of the input they're getting from a variety of organizations to set the next voluntary national building code. Canada has a federal a national building code. It's a volunteer code. The 2020 code was to be announced early in 2021, and I think we probably won't see it released until December of 2021. And then we'll immediately get to work on the 2025 updates. So we're teeing ourselves up, we're positioning ourselves and the Passive House community to really make some input on 2021.
Mm-hmm. And there's a real art to what you're describing, I think, in terms of getting into the decision makers, the policymakers, the political leaders' shoes, or understanding where they're at in order to show how Passive House can be the pathway to reach their goals. And I imagine that your background is fairly useful in that, since that you've worn those shoes before.
Oh yeah. Yes, I have been lobbied as an elected official starting in my days as a municipal councillor right through to minister. But, in the early days, my early work in public affairs, I spent an awful lot of time working with government officials, we'll say, to increase funding for special projects in the far north with my First Nation communities, the First Nation communities I was working with. So understanding how to tell the story, first you have to understand the person you're telling you're making the pitch to, you're telling the story to, and everyone has different needs, right? Our job is to help those elected officials and civil servants get to where they need to be. We like to push them beyond where they think they need to be, quite frankly. The urgency for the past year and a half, the focus has been on COVID-19, of course, but always in the background, the drumbeat of you think this is bad. You think COVID-19 is bad. You think this pandemic is bad. You ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
Wait till the impacts of severe drought, the impacts on food prices because of severe drought across, wide swaths of Canada and the United States. What's that going to mean for food prices? How are we going to source food for our countries? I mean, these are real important issues that governments need, that are worrying governments of all political stripes. And Passive House is there to say, when it comes to buildings, that's one area where we can help you. You guys got to figure out that big stuff, but when it comes to buildings, we're here to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great segue, I think, to just give us a little update on policy progress, and then what are the current priorities. I mean, I know that it's a quite a docket. You're working in Ontario, British Columbia at the federal level, the municipal level. You're looking at social housing and education. I know you're developing and sharing like a policy toolkit. I think listeners would love to hear about some of these details.
Yeah, you made me feel exhausted with that list, and I know in our and as I'm meeting with the members of the team and we pull the Excel spreadsheet up on everything folks are working on, I go down the list and think, wow, no wonder everyone's feeling tired. But it's really exciting. I mean, at the national level, quite frankly, there's a couple of areas. I'll sort of work top down. At the national level, I mentioned the National Building Code and how important it is to bake in Passive House standards. And I'll tell, I tell decision makers, I don't care what you call the standard. It doesn't have to be the Passive House standard. Just take the technical aspects of the standard and bake it in to whatever you're doing. The other area that we're really pushing hard with the federal government, We've done a rough estimation in Canada that over the next 5 years, about 33% of all building in Canada will be funded by 4 levels of government. So government has an amazing opportunity to transform the marketplace if it takes a leadership role and if it demonstrates Passive House, quite frankly, and not only in new builds, but also in retrofit, in EnerFit. And this is what we're challenging government to do. So we're working with the federal government, the National Building Code. We want as many Passive House principles baked right into it and standards baked into it. But we also want the federal government to, in its new building program, to adopt Passive House standard. We've had some successes there. The Parks Canada Interpretation Center that's going up in Ontario will be Passive House, and it may even be Passive House Premium. That's still a bit to be determined. And so we've got a number of these types of programs across the country with the federal government, where it's testing the Passive House to see how easy it is and what can be done.
So if I understand correctly, then you're talking about mandating like three pillars here: mandating through code, and then leveraging public dollars. 33% of buildings receiving public money. That's a big deal. And then leading by example.
Absolutely, lead by example, and lead by example, just not to show that technically it can be done. But, I mean, a case in point, and I'm veering away a bit. Toronto Community Housing Corporation is the second largest social housing provider in North America, second only to New York. They've embarked on a retrofit program for about 200 towers, medium to high towers. all said and done, the estimation they've made is they will need at least or more than 200,000 passive house standard windows in their buildings. That's going to change the window marketplace, the fenestration industry in Canada. That alone will change the fenestration industry in Canada. And that's what we mean by, when government leads with those kinds of dollars, you get marketplace transformation, and it drives down the cost of all of those components for everybody else. Now, when private builders are building something new, hey, that passive house window, it's no more expensive than the double pane, window that we used in the last project. So we'll now go passive house window. There's the ability for government and government dollars to really alter the marketplace is substantial. This is part of the pitch we make to government in terms of why adopt these very high performance building standards is it makes it easier for others to follow. First of all, there's the lessons learned. Second of all, the components come down in price, and we really trying to drive a Canadian manufacturing sector here as well. So we have a large number of passive house window manufacturers in Canada. We want more. We want them doing more. HRVs, we have really only one. We need more. We need European manufacturers to set up locations in Canada and take advantage of the passive house growth here. When I left office as Minister of Environment and Climate Change, our green energy plan was responsible for creating about 140,000 new jobs in Ontario coming out of the bad recession of 2008, 2009. These were good paying jobs. These were people who were maintaining, the big windmills and solar farms and installing solar panels on roofs, and the accountants and secretaries and all of the people involved in that industry. About 140,000 people in Ontario alone. At that time, in all of Canada, there were about 180,000 people employed in the automotive industry. That's the part manufacturers and the assemblers. So you see how the green sector is really growing leaps and bounds, and the more traditional ICE internal combustion engine manufacturers, are struggling. And it also, to go off on a tangent, demonstrates how you can transform the marketplace and create good jobs in areas where traditionally you were reliant on a carbon economy, whether it be, the oil and gas extraction or automotive manufacturing in Ontario. So, yes, climate change scares the pants off me, but at the same time, it also means opportunity for people. And we need to present the opportunity. We need to present, if there are positives, we need to present the positives as well in terms of economic development and good jobs.
You're also talking about smart interventions that drive systemic change. And I think one of the things that can be overwhelming, and this is borrowing from an idea from the director of Project Drawdown, who I follow on Twitter, and he was making the point today that we talk about the need for systemic change in order to address climate change, and I'm paraphrasing, so I apologize to him if I get this wrong, but which is true. But that doesn't mean that we need to change the entire system in one fell swoop, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily need the huge, grand solution and gesture in one swoop, because the nature of systems is when you alter a piece of it, there are ripple effects. Because everything's interrelated, that you can start, setting off positive feedback loops that we want to see in the world, and that those can, start to transform the automotive industry toward EVs, or completely transform the fenestration industry in Canada with 200,000 passive house windows, so there's a lot of power there that government and practitioners can wield in making change, even if it isn't like the whole enchilada in one swoop.
If we try and change everything in one day, we end up in chaos. This is part of my messaging when I'm talking to my friends in elected office. It's not part of the official harangue, but it's every day we don't do something leads us to that chaos.
Yeah.
Because one day we're going to have to make massive change, and we're going to have to do it suddenly.
Yeah.
And we won't be able to without great disruption in our lives. And with great disruption in our lives comes great political disruption and great instability in our democratic systems. And I don't mean to be fear mongering and scaremongering, but this is why I'm so desperate to get us as a nation moving in the right direction, going further, faster, because right now, what costs the dollar to change 10 years from now is going to cost $100 to change, and it's going to cause great disruption in our lives. And that's not good for democracy. That's not good for my children's lives.
I hear you.
So that's, I told you a little bit about what we're doing with the feds. We're working in those two areas. We're working on legislation with them. We're getting them to lead by example. We're working with federal governments or provincial governments to do the same thing. Working here in Ontario, certainly working closely with the government of BC to influence the STEP code. At every opportunity we get, we tell them we think the STEP code has slid backwards a little bit, because you can build a code built home and still get top tier certification. And we have one of our members who can demonstrate that in some of the building he's been involved with. So I think BC needs to step it up. We were really heartened to see that the city of Vancouver stuck with its passive house building plan, certification plan, and a huge shout out to everyone in the community who wrote and called councillors, who sent in emails. I put myself in the councillor's shoes. I remember a few 18-hour debates that I lived through, and it was no fun. But, it demonstrates that's how important it is. And I think at the end of the day, in our letter to mayor and council, we laid a number of things out. And the biggest message, though, is that we'll continue to support Vancouver publicly, behind the scenes, to offer our policy support, our ideas around policy, and to help make connections. But it was so important that Vancouver stuck to its guns and not back down in the face of some pretty intense lobbying. And it was so nice to see so many individuals come out, professionals, members of Passive House Canada and others, to say, that's not true. What you're being told is not true. The marketplace is in transformation. The components are available. They can be readily available. The price differential isn't that, it's this. And we know because we've actually built these things. And I love this about Passive House Canada. We've got the people who design the buildings, engineer the buildings, the building scientists. We've got the tradespeople who swing the hammers, and the GCs who pull it all together and do the costing. We know how to build buildings, right? And so you want to talk to a group of people about how to build a building? These are the folks you talk to. You don't talk to some academic or some lobbyist who doesn't know one end of a hammer from the other. And I should be careful, because I position myself as a lobbyist, and they won't let me pick a hammer up either. And so when you get into it and the politicians really start to understand, you're the people on the street, you're the ones actually doing this work, they begin to see that it's quite doable. And it's a very powerful message. So the other reason it was so important for Vancouver is that Vancouver really is the shining beacon,
I was definitely very worried and reminded, wow, I've really been beginning to take Vancouver for granted, that position of leadership, because it is so important.
I think you're right. I think it's a wake-up call for all of us that we cannot take Vancouver for granted. And I think a number of people were taken by surprise when that report came forward. And we'll have to be more vigilant, quite frankly, in watching and supporting Vancouver so that it can continue to make the right decisions. We have a similar decision that's coming along in Toronto. The Toronto Green Standard is moving from version 3 to version 4. And it's receiving similar pushback from a minority in the building industry who have the same old tired cliched arguments about capacity and component availability and cost and those sorts of things. And this issue will be before the Planning and Housing Committee, June 28th. I'll be delegating to it. And I think we've got great support. We have enough support around the table to move Toronto from its current version 3 to adopting version 4. We're pushing them to move to version 5 by 2025, a year sooner. Let's get a good thing going. And it would probably be harder to make this argument if Vancouver had backed away. But because Vancouver steamed ahead, I think that has made us all feel more confident in Toronto, the councillors and city staff, that Toronto's quite capable of doing that as well. And where Toronto goes, the rest of Ontario goes. So all of the municipal regions around Toronto are watching Toronto to see what they're doing. So it's that domino effect. But we lose a few battles, but we're winning the war. And that's what, at the end of the day, that's what's really important. So working with the feds, working with the provinces, we're doing the same thing with municipal governments and regional governments, helping them get to their climate emergency targets. And one of the most exciting things I think that's been happening in the passive house world is the adoption of passive house, both new build and retrofit. The adoption of passive house standards by these social housing agencies. I would like to say led by Toronto Community Housing, but really Hamilton Housing has led the way here in Ontario. But we see that ripple effect all across the country, that it is now sort of the go-to standard. If you want to interfit or retrofit or build new, you need to build to passive house. And a lot of it has to do with building quality living space for people, and this is someplace, Canada has learned from the US. I want to be able to show people that passive house, this green premium discussion is really, we call it the green premium myth. And, this is just one way we can help debunk that. All sorts of really exciting stuff happening municipally in social housing. We're able to provide better quality housing for people and savings for those agencies. And when it comes to retrofits, we can drive those energy savings up to 75% using the Enerfit standard. And that's real money that those agencies then can put in to build more units or upgrade more units. And it's a great use of tax dollars.
Yeah, that theme of housing quality is something that Bomi Jung has been speaking of. She was recently of NYCHA and has been involved in some accelerator stuff, and just a really, really great thinker. She makes the point that affordable housing providers and social housing providers have been kind of defining what housing quality is for a very long time. They've been in this position of leadership around this, and that using the passive house approach to retrofitting buildings or doing new buildings is also really a form of climate justice, because when we talk, it's not just about energy efficiency, and certainly the savings for the providers is really important, but it's also, when we do these better buildings, these are better places for people to live. They can be, they're places that are resilient during power outages, all the health benefits.
It makes so much sense for these agencies. It provides, as you said, a far better quality home. And with that, it can help people heal. it can help people get on with their lives. If you're living in a moldy, cockroach infested, social housing unit, whatever your struggles are in life are not going to be made easier if you're having to live in that environment or raise children in that environment. And too often, I saw that in action. If I can tell a tale from my days in politics, I toured a social housing complex, affordable housing complex in my own riding, actually. It was a series of townhouses heated electrically, built in the 80s. Windows sucked, not much insulation, and electric baseboard heating. And it was rent geared to income. And we made the announcement. We had done not an EnerFit, but we had definitely upgraded insulation. And by we, I mean our government had paid to upgrade insulation and windows and really ramp things up. And that to all of these units. And I had a lady come up to me. We were all there, the big officials. We had the ribbon cutting. We had a bunch of residents wandering around, wondering who the heck these people are, in their little courtyard. But I had a lady came up and she poked someone and said, who's in charge here? So they pointed her to me, and she came over and introduced herself, a really nice lady. And she said, could I invite you to my house? And I didn't want to, but I didn't want to intrude, like this is her. And but yes, she was so proud. She wanted to show me her house. And so she took me to one of her houses, and my staff was trailing along, and she had, a teenage daughter, teenage son, single mom. And she was on social assistance. So her income wasn't that great. And she told me that the work we had done on her social housing unit had cut her electrical bill in half. And I still get choked up because she looked at me and she didn't know what a minister or an MPP or anything was, right? She just knew that I was the guy who had something to do with cutting her electricity bill in half. And she said, now I can afford good food for my children. And I'll tell you, I still get choked up when I think about it. I mean, that's why I got into politics, was to help people like that. And so everything you hear from the academics about the need for quality housing is so absolutely true. So I'm hoping that we now have a young man and a young woman who've hopefully gone off to college or university and who've had good food for the last 5 years, and a proud mom. Because I certainly was proud of my staff and our government and the region of York, where these houses are located, for getting involved in that project. That's a wonderful story, and I can't wait to see how that same kind of momentum and impetus and the kind of wisdom that you're bringing to this work manifests itself in Passive House Canada and in the Passive House movement in Canada. That's really inspiring. Yeah. So those are the things that get us up in the morning and keep us going and keep us pushing forward. Better quality housing, social housing. It's so darned important that we provide better quality housing for all of our, our mental health and our physical health. So we have these conversations with in Ontario, municipal governments are responsible for social housing. So we get to tie in their GHG emission reduction targets with their social housing stock. So it's a little easier than other places like BC. That's a provincial, organization that takes care of social housing. But in many ways, civil servants in BC, they've been talking about this stuff for a long time, and they get it. So lots of exciting stuff happening. We're building in Quebec. We have great relations with our Quebec cousins. We're offering our courses en français, and soon to be offering the exams in Québécois. We're building in our eastern provinces. There's great demand down there for knowledge and just for networking. We all know how important the socials are. That's what you guys are so expert at doing. So we've got a growing movement down in Halifax. The Eastern Ontario, many parts of Eastern Ontario face the struggle that energy, comes from burning oil or coal. So we don't have the clean energy that we should have there. The federal government and the provinces are working to address that and to try and clean the energy. But on the upside, energy cost, if you have to heat your house in Halifax with oil, you're dropping $1,000 plus a month in the winter months to keep your house warm. So the passive house makes a lot of sense there. In where I live in Ontario, a house here, you spend $120 on natural gas. You're not going to interfit your house to save money on your natural gas bill. But down east, where you're heating your house with oil or electrical baseboard,
so much
heating,
yeah.
There's huge opportunity. So I'm so excited by the opportunities all across Canada. So excited to be working with a great group of people.
And that was Chris Ballard, CEO of Passive House Canada. Awesome interview, Zach.
Yeah, well, he was pretty easy to interview. I mean, as you could hear, he is a wealth of information and wisdom and insight. So it was really great to hear what he had to say. What were your key takeaways from that?
Well, firstly, just amazing opportunity to talk to someone like that. So thank you for making that happen. But also big hats off to Passive House Canada, and we've talked to Rob on the show before and the predecessor there, just to get that organisation and the industry to the level where they would attract someone of Chris's calibre. This is a former minister in the government, and with his connections, his experience, his the work that he's done in the past, he would not have been short on opportunities coming, as a former minister. So for him to be attracted and see the opportunities for himself and the potential of an organisation like Passive House Canada is just huge for the industry. So. It's super exciting to have someone like that in that position. And I would love all of the other affiliate organizations of Passive House. I know that here in New Zealand, we're trying to sort of professionalize our organization and model it somewhat on Passive House Canada. I hope this is inspiration to all those other organizations that are doing similar advocacy and education work around the world.
Yeah, right. The fact that he's there, I think, also is an indication of where the movement is in Passive House in Canada, because they're at a place now where these policies are being implemented rather than being advocated for. I mean, there still needs to be advocacy. Actually, that's a good segue to just go back to the Vancouver story just real quickly. So the city of Vancouver, of course, is this international success story in Passive House circles because they've got this really progressive set of rules and policies that deeply incentivize essentially passive house building in the city, and through zoning incentives and other rules, and it's resulting in this explosion of passive house development there. It's really exciting to watch from Seattle. We're just south of the border. Watch what's happening there. I'm just completely envious. Well, just I think a month ago, there was a really kind of unexpected and strong move driven by conservative forces, and I think there were some maybe some minority of the building community who were against this high performance moves that have been happening. There's this effort to gut that whole policy. in Vancouver. And so I think all of us were reminded not to rest on laurels and wow, we need to be making sure that these policies remain in place. So there was a big mobilization of Passive House practitioners and designers and builders and policy wonks to go and show up and testify in front of the city leaders to ensure that policy, these progressive policies, remained in place. And fortunately, they did. So, over the years, Passive House Canada and the Passive House community in Canada and in Vancouver have built a really strong network and community and base of people power, and they were able to bring that to bear. So it was good outcome.
Yeah, it is. It is a good reminder. I mean, Chris alluded to that a couple of times in the interview, that there are detractors and there are people who oppose change for whatever reason, if they have vested interest or they just don't like the idea of changing. So he is obviously used to that. It's great hearing someone lobbying who is very used to being lobbied as well. He mentioned that he knows what it's like on the other side of having people come and try and get him to do things as a minister. So that's a useful perspective to have as well, of knowing what it's like on both sides of that fence. One of the things that Chris highlighted was education right at the start. He said he really underlined the importance of education across the whole industry, ground up, just designers, builders, tradespeople, developers, and that's he puts a lot of weight in that being where the change is coming from. And as an organisation, that's where they've put a lot of their effort. They've got this. I think he said they're one of the largest education providers outside of China in the Passive House world. And I guess that's where they see their leverage, is because if there are people out there learning this stuff, then they're going to be spreading that knowledge and doing a lot of the work for them in a way, and growing the industry. You get that big ripple effect. So that's a really good lesson, I think, for all of us in this space, and particularly all of the affiliate organizations that are out there trying to make a change.
And as policy efforts, advocacy efforts, and development efforts are successful, then the education becomes mission critical, because we need practitioners to be able to deliver, right, and do great passive house buildings and avoid pitfalls and mistakes. And because we know that if there are big mistakes and any big kind of obvious problems in the implementation of policy, that we've got those detractors ready to pounce to tear down those policies. So that I think that it will only become more important, the development of the industry, of the trades and of designers and engineers, as we see this kind of progress that we've seen in Canada.
So the other thing that I really liked about his stories was the bigger picture. Obviously, climate change is really real for not just Chris himself, but also his former constituents and the people that he's done a lot of work with in the past, noticing real changes in their natural environment. And he's obviously very passionate about accepting that those changes are happening, and they're happening now. And he says that we've passed the tipping point, but not losing all hope that there is change possible at that really high level, large scale, and that's a really important job to do everywhere. But then there are those stories, and he shared that story of the single mum who, as a result of just having a good house, wasn't even a passive house, but the benefits to her of upgrading their home to something that just worked decently meant that she could put food on the table, basically. And it comes down to those sort of basic needs. So there's kind of something in there for everyone. But it's just kind of a nice applied way of thinking global, but acting local and making real change to people wherever you are.
And a great reminder of the real human impact that our collective work has on people's lives. I thought that was a powerful story, and whether it's allowing people the space and the ability to put food on the table or to ride out crazy weather events, or there are all these ways that I've just been thinking about shelter in a whole new way in the last while, after going through this. And I think that, it just is a different understanding of what we need to protect ourselves from, unfortunately, but it makes all the difference when you're in when you then move into a building that is prepared for that kind of event. Then you can thrive as a person in that building, and it's a big deal. So
it is a big deal, and it's very encouraging to know that we have the means and we have the technology and we have the passionate people willing to do it. Awesome. Hey, thank you for making that happen, Zach. Great to get people like Chris on the show. I know that he's out there doing good work. What have we got coming up in the next few weeks?
We have some exciting stuff happening this week on the Accelerator. We've got Craig Stevenson, Derek Tillman, and Donnie Walker coming to speak at the Construction Tech Tuesday, Wednesday, your time, about a Pittsburgh project called Fifth and Dinwiddie. And this is a multi-building passive house project that includes community center elements, affordable housing, and really inspiring. I got a chance to talk with both Craig and Derek at the North American Passive House Network conference. So I know a little bit about this project now, and I think people will really be excited to see what's going on and get a chance to dive into the technical details as we do at Construction Tech. So on then Wednesday, we have a return of Natalie Leonard, a very popular speaker at the Global Passive House Happy Hour. And she is going to be speaking about fast, cheap, and net zero passive house. So don't we need a lot of fast, cheap, and net zero passive house in our lives? So that's gonna be really exciting to see. And then on Wednesday, July 21st and Thursday, July 22nd, so add a day to both those dates for you down under, we are collaborating with Green Building United on their conference called 2021 New Gravity Accelerated Edition. So Green Building United has been doing the New Gravity Conference now for 5 or 6 years. It's really a great conference, very, very highly regarded. It takes place usually in Philadelphia, and it focuses on high performance buildings and a lot about passive house and affordable housing. And so we're taking that format, Green Building United and Passive House Accelerator, and applying the fast, fun, and factual approach to a virtual version of the conference this year. So it'll be two-hour evenings. Actually, it won't be evening your time, but it will be for us in North America. And we'll start with a keynote by Dr. Kwesi Daniels, who's the head of architecture at Tuskegee University. It's going to be great. Please join us. And of course, there's all sorts of other stuff happening in the passive house world that we will include a link to in show notes.
So awesome to have a lot of these events now available wherever you are, because they're hybrid or virtual events that people can join in and see what's going on, which is totally relevant and fantastic stuff. So awesome. Thank you again, Zach. Always a pleasure. And thank you to all our listeners. Don't forget to check out this and all past episodes on the Passive House Accelerator and all the other great resources that are continuing to be added to that site. To some really, really cool stuff there, both printed, audio, videos, all sorts. And we'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast with another episode. So we'll see you then.